Welcome to WWW Wario.
Take the Zelda series and remove the dungeons. What are you left with? Basically a game franchise without its core element. Today we're going for a brand new Zelda Countdown, but this time I'm not alone. Say hello to Slashstar314 or Jason.
Hi Andy, yeah, thanks for the invite. I'm looking forward to this.
We are here today to take a look at what we look at as underrated dungeons in the Zelda series. Each of us have made our own list with our 5 choices that we'll explain to you and to each other as we go on. So I just say we jump straight into the list. At my number 5 I put the Lakebed Temple. Even before the Lakebed Temple begins, it sets the mood perfectly, as it's located far beneath the waves of Lake Hylia. I find this to be very awesome, since finding something like a dungeon far beneath the water is really cool to me. The ocean is the least explored area in the world, after all. The dungeon music in this one couldn't fit any better with the dungeon it's in. The music honestly sounds like you're deep down in the water. It sounds thick, in a way, if that's the way to put it. It's haunting, making you think that you actually are deep underwater and don't see very clearly, and all of these instrumental noises the song makes you think that something is lurking just outside of eyesight. The temple can get confusing at times with the water currents and the rotating staircase, but once you figure it out, it's actually quite fun. The dungeon looks good. It has this natural cavern design, combined with the style of some old waterworks. You get the claw shot here, which is an amazing item, which leads to clever puzzles. I just feel that this dungeon is a dungeon few people actually talk about, maybe because of bad memories from a similar dungeon that we all know about. The boss isn't the most difficult one, but the room you're fighting the boss in is something I really like. Now, that feels claustrophobic, even though it's huge. Not only are you far beneath the waves to begin with in this dungeon, but this room, you jump through a very small hole which leads to a gigantic room filled with water, and you keep falling deeper and deeper down, with only a small hole on top as the exit. A pretty freaky ending to a great dungeon.
Guilty as charged. The Lakebed Temple is my top favorite temple from the series. I love water, I love Twilight Princess and how it executes its graphics and mystery, and I adore hard and threatening dungeons, at which the Lakebed Temple plows through all 3 of those bullet points. I absolutely agree. The Lakebed Temple really stands out from every other water dungeon because it isn't man-made like the other water dungeons. It takes place in an underwater cavern with its own natural aesthetics, and it's awesome. It adds a really menacing tone to the cavern that supports the loneliness of Twilight Princess, and I can't get enough of it. Well, Andy, I can definitely see why you chose it. It's honestly harder to find Zelda players who appreciate the water dungeons, but I won't judge. If someone legitimately tried to enjoy the dungeon but just couldn't because that person doesn't like the water aesthetic, doesn't like the music, or had trouble with the puzzle for a while, I won't hold it against them. I have dungeons I enjoy and don't enjoy just like every other Zelda player in existence.
You bring up a good point. It's hard to find players who like the water dungeons, but maybe they just don't give it enough chance.
The Skyview Temple had great first impressions. The Lanayru mining facility had time stones, and the ancient cistern, fire sanctuary, and sandship had their unique themes that got their praise. So my number 5 pick is the Earth Temple from Skyward Sword because I think it's the most glossed over dungeon in the series. I never hear any Zelda players talk about it. I play 2D Zelda games and 3D Zelda games because they each have their different strengths I love each of them for. So I thought the Earth Temple was really neat for its aesthetics and charm. I know it's a very simple concept, but it was awesome seeing Link rolling around on the ball on the lava because I love Love these natural looking fire dungeons really up close. Sometimes the puzzles don't have to be the reason I enjoy Zelda games, but more for the scenery they provide. Though the reason I put it at number 5 is that I'm not really surprised that this is underrated, and I can easily see why. It's sure, it has basic obstacles, the item is just bombs, at which, let's face it, every Zelda game has done that since ever. The puzzles don't stand out, stuff like that. Though what nails it to being underrated, me and Joe, a collaborator of mine when I did the top 35 Zelda dungeons with him, did a separate list for the fans to vote for their top 35 Zelda dungeons. And guess what? Out of the 30 voters we had, nobody voted it in their top 10 dungeons and was the only dungeon that didn't get a vote. Ouch. What do you think, Andy?
You are certainly not alone. I too never hear any words being spoken about this dungeon. It's one of those dungeons that just feel friendly and welcoming as soon as you take your first steps inside. The dungeon is pleasant for the eye to look at, music is energetic, and even though it was short, I feel that that's a part of the dungeon's charm. As you mentioned, rolling around on a ball as Link, and as well as running away from the big boulder at the end, made this dungeon memorable, instead of just being a basic, boring, fiery dungeon that you have to go through, as many people might look at it as.
Yeah, and sometimes it's really the charm that does it.
This is a dungeon I didn't really care for before. It was there, you know, it was something you had to go through to get to the Tower of the Gods, but as time passed, the dungeon kind of grew on me. First of all, it's cool that the dungeon actually is its own island, floating next to the Forest Haven. It reminds me of Donkey Kong's and King K. Rool's island from Donkey Kong 64. Climbing the main island and gliding over to the Forbidden Woods using the Deku Leaf, instead of just entering a simple door, was cool and unique. The dungeon itself has an atmosphere I feel is underrated. The music truly makes you feel like you're in some sort of forest, a haunted forest, but not a wide open one, but an enclosed, dangerous forest where something is wrong. It kind of reminds me of a maze just by listening to the music. It's like the whole dungeon or the whole environment is alive, and you can get a feeling of something hiding in the grass or even in the walls. I like the overall design of the dungeon and how you use 2 new items here instead of 1, being the Deku Leaf and the Boomerang. It's a dungeon that I would think of as annoying with the first glance, but it actually feels great and kinda simple to go through. I'm somehow getting a peaceful feeling as I walk through its grassy corridors. The boss battle is also surprisingly satisfying and epic in a way. I feel this dungeon has blended in with the game itself and become forgotten, which is sad since the dungeon isn't bad at all. What's your take on the Forbidden Woods, Jason?
Unfortunately, everybody has that least favorite dungeon from every Zelda game, and mine happens to be the Forbidden Woods as of late from Wind Waker. It's not because of anything you said, Andy, and you have excellent points. It's something more unique to me personally. I have 2 reasons, is that 1, I don't like high-pitched instrumental music, at which Wind Waker is the only Zelda game to have some, and it has a lot of it, which is why the game isn't a favorite of mine. Those high-pitched chimes in the Forbidden Woods music literally makes me want me to pull my hair out every time I hear it. The second reason is that there are 3 types of dungeons I particularly like, and 3 types that I'm not fond of. And unfortunately, forest environments lands in my not interesting zone. Grass, trees, and dark woods just aren't fascinating for me to look at. It's not by choice, it's just who I am and what I naturally happen to like and dislike in my environments. Other opinions can't change something like that. So Andy, I completely respect your thoughts and what you're saying, but I'm going to have to head to the underrated side of the fence. Nothing popped out to me, the music and environment weren't to my liking, and I've honestly forgotten this entire dungeon. But my thoughts do further prove your point, Andy, that this is an underrated dungeon worthy for your list.
I totally respect your opinion. You don't really like this type of music, but I do, and that's completely fine. It's really fun to have different opinions.
Now this is where I'm going to be biased because I do understand where everyone comes from with the Wind Temple. The music is weird, Makar is a pain with escorting him, and the dungeon is really tough. Those are really good points. Where the bias comes in is that I love really hard and threatening dungeons. So the Wind Temple is a favorite of mine because it incorporates both. But here's why I think it's underrated. It is the last dungeon. It's supposed to bring out all of its guns to make your life uncomfortable. Taking care of Link is easy. Taking care of someone else is hard. The dungeon should be hard to figure out. I do agree that this would have been a bad dungeon if it was in the middle of the game like a big difficulty curve. But as a last dungeon, I think it works. It tests everything out of you like a last dungeon should in a Zelda game. But of course, not every dungeon is perfect for every Zelda player. So if it's not your dungeon, that's okay. Different strokes for different folks. There is one more thing I'll say I adored about this dungeon is that it felt like the final test. It's kind of the same satisfaction I felt from the Ganon's Tower from Ocarina of Time. I don't know, it seems unrealistic to me that everything should just go your way in an adventure game. Last I checked, an adventure is full of danger and unexpected misfortune. Treating the game like a vacation where the game will be like sitting on the beach and eating watermelons and being comfortable the whole time just seems silly to me.
As you say, Jason, we all have different opinions and memories with dungeons, which is great. It's always fun to hear how different opinions can be and no answer is wrong. Which is why the Wind Temple affects me in a weird way. I both love it and hate it at the same time. The atmosphere is amazing. It's this type of music again that I really like, this just mysterious and weird type of music that makes me think. The colors and the weird but great song makes for a great combination. That said, I was and still am never looking forward to this dungeon in my Wind Waker playthroughs. Not because it was necessarily tougher than the others, which it was, but because I honestly didn't like the overall experience. I wasn't a huge fan of Makar, the puzzles didn't get to me as much either. But as you say, I think it deserves more praise for being a step up in difficulty from its previous dungeons.
But you do bring up a really good point. It's okay to not enjoy the Wind Temple even if I say it's underrated. It's kind of funny, we have opposite views on the Forbidden Woods and the Wind Temple.